What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and before we start this video, my fiance Mariah has a twitch.tv channel called Eat Codes, and you'll find it down in the description. But she makes like all kinds of food that's like geek culture stuff, video games and stuff like that. She recently bought a DC Comics cookbook, and they're all DC Comics themed. I chime in there every once in a while and hang out with you guys. It's cool. So make sure you guys go check her out, show her support, and yeah, let's begin. Alright guys, we are picking back up again with the Three Jokers, and again, if you guys haven't bought this, you really need to, right? Like, this is one of these stories that you really need to buy and just sit at home and read, right? Like, we're coming up on the fall anyway, so those of you guys who live anywhere but like the Southwest, you guys know it's getting around to that time of year where it's just a great time to like buy some comic books and just read, right? Like, you guys know what I'm talking about. But it's ridiculously amazing. And at the end of this, I actually have a question for you guys. Hopefully I'll remember to ask it. But what we end up doing here is we pick up initially with the comedian, who basically arrives home. Now, this is kind of cool because the idea behind the comedian, the way this kind of played out here is we had different iterations of the Joker, right? We had three versions of the Joker. We had the criminal, we had the clown, and we had the comedian. The clown was the one who shot Barbara Gordon during the Killing Joke, right? That's the way it seemed to kind of point out, or seemed to be the direction that they were going in. The comedian is the one that we have here, and the criminal is like the classic Joker. And the way this goes down is you basically have this, this comedian, the comedian basically, showing up at his home, right? Showing up there to meet his wife and to meet his kid. And this is kind of the weird thing here because it almost kind of points to the idea that this is the guy who shot Barbara Gordon, right? Like, this comedian is the one who shot Barbara, that the clown was not the one who killed Barbara Gordon. It seems to be kind of like Geoff Johns sort of throwing that out there, right? Kind of introducing that idea to us. But you get this scenario where you basically have a meeting with his wife and basically talking to their kid. Now, the reason why I say that is because those of you guys who remember the story, The Killing Joke, this woman looks a lot like his wife, right? She looks a lot like the wife of the Joker before he became the Joker in The Killing Joke. And she was pregnant. So it's kind of one of these things of like, what happens if she didn't die, right? What happened if she wasn't killed by the criminals? Joker still became Joker, but like, she wasn't killed by the criminals, and he just kind of went on living his life as the Joker with like a family and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's pretty screwed up, to be honest with you, right? Like, the little kid's like, why can't we just leave? And she's like, we can't, like, he'll come after us, he'll find us, that kind of a thing. She's like, you need to come down to dinner, you got to play your part, right? You got to play the role. It's the only way for us to basically survive this whole ordeal. And so what you end up getting is this really, really strange kind of dinner, right? It's not wildly crazy like, the New 52 Death of the Family, right? Where like they're eating with their faces cut off, or at least they believe their faces are cut off. It's just like a very tense and terrifying situation because nobody knows what goes on in the Joker's head, right? Like, the Joker could just arbitrarily kill you and it wouldn't make sense to anybody but himself. But at the end of the day, that's all he really cares about. It makes sense to him, and that's all that really matters. The other part of this is that they're having octopus for dinner. And while the kid doesn't really like octopus, the Joker's like, okay, well, let's see if we can't turn that frown upside down, right? What do you call octopus triplets that look exactly alike? A tentacle, which is kind of weird. But the Joker just cracks up laughing. And if I'm being honest with you guys, I think it's funny because of the Joker, right? Like, here's a question I want to ask you guys. In the old Batman the Animated Series cartoon show where you had Mark Hamill voicing the Joker, how many of you guys would laugh when the Joker laughed because you just couldn't help it? That was me. I just couldn't help it. It was just funny. It was hilarious listening to him laugh. But we basically end up snapping back to reality, right? And you've got the criminal who basically asks, comedian, who were you talking to? Like, what are you doing here? And he's like, I was having dinner. And he asks, with whom? And he says, with myself. And it's kind of an interesting thing because he's like, well, you're basically wasting time, right? Like, the problem that you have is nobody else out there matters except for Batman, right? It was your idea to let him in on our little secret, right? To give him a trail to follow, to make it more fun. And now one of us is dead, right? You basically led the Bat family to one of us, to the clown, and you got him killed. And it's kind of nuts here because looking at the first video that we did, the way this played out is Geoff Johns kind of pointed at the idea that the clown was the one who like killed Jason Todd. And the comedian was the one who shot Barbara Gordon. That was kind of like the way this worked, right? It was kind of him basically saying like, here are the Jokers that you know. And it's kind of wild because with this going down, you basically pick up with Jim Gordon. And you kind of have like this apartment that belongs to a judge where the dogs are all like Joker infected, right? Like, which sounds horrifying, right? Like, they look like Rottweilers or like pit bulls. They look like Rottweilers, to be honest, but like, they're infected by Joker toxin, right? So Batman gets in there, Batman knocks him out. But it's one of these things where you basically end up finding out that this guy was, at least it was believed, believed that he was mauled to death by his own dogs. And in some ways he was, but he was also exposed to the Joker toxin. And it's one of these things where it's a question that's kind of being asked here. Why is Judge Walls the person here, right? Like, why is Judge Walls the person who's dead? This doesn't really make any sense. And the response of Batman is, well, you know, when Jim Gordon says like he retired years ago, the response of Batman was he didn't retire, he was forced out, right? He was a dirty judge. He was taking bribes from like the old Arkham officials to send criminals to Arkham Asylum, right? So no big loss that this judge is gone, right? He was a bad judge, he was a dirty judge. The world's probably better off without him. But it's one of these things where at the end of the day, Barbara Gordon basically walks in, and where Jim Gordon's like, I thought you were escorting one of the Jokers, the response of Barbara is, I need to talk to Batman. And when he asks like, where's the Red Hood, she says, you know, it's like, well, you know, Commissioner Gordon's like, you guys are looking for the Red Hood too? And Batman's like, the Red Hood's not a criminal. And that's when Barbara says, yes, he is. And there's kind of this unwritten communication here that's like, I need to talk to you right now, right? So you basically end up having the two of them take off. Batman in the Batmobile, Barbara Gordon on her little bat cycle, whatever it is. And they kind of have this thing where Barbara's like, he killed the Joker. He killed one of them. Like, what are we gonna do about this? And Batman does not take the approach that you think he would. You think Batman would say, okay, then like, let's go grab Jason Todd. Like, we're not gonna kill him or anything, but like, we're gonna take him. Like, we're gonna take him to you know, to some place where he can't escape from, right? We'll finish the rest of this out, and then we'll basically go through and then we'll deal with Jason Todd and find out why he did what he did, right? But like, that Joker's already dead. There's not much to be done. Saving Gotham's more important. And while Batman does take that approach to a degree, he actually tries to rationalize the actions of Jason Todd, you know, and saying, you know, that when Barbara Gordon's like, now we have to deal with two more Jokers and the Red Hood because we don't know where he is. We can't find him. He's out there in Gotham somewhere, and like, Red Hood cannot be found if he does not want to be found, right? Like, he knows us. He knows exactly what we would do and how we would look for them, and he knows how to dodge us. But Batman kind of responds and saying like, he killed a Joker, Barbara. Like, that's all we know, right? All we know is that we killed a Joker, and there, you know, that he killed a Joker. And there's this kind of back and forth, right? That where Barbara Gordon is just kind of like, no, he shot a human being tied to a chair. Like, that's a problem. The response of Batman is, you know, the Joker hurt him, right? Like, he healed wrong. He got more violent. You got stronger. And Batman kind of tries to rationalize this and basically saying like, there's something wrong with Jason Todd. That's why he did what he did. Almost kind of making this argument, it's not really Jason's fault that he did what he did. Now, he doesn't say it in so many words, but it kind of looks like that's more or less an argument that he's creating. And Batman kind of looks at that and says like, I've never forgiven myself for leaving him in that grave, right? Because when Jason Todd died in the original Death in the Family storyline, when he died in that, he was for all intents and purposes dead, right? I mean, that's kind of how it was. Batman put him in the ground, Batman buried him. The fact that Jason Todd was actually alive did not become a thing until you got to like Under the Red Hood / Infinite Crisis. And the big question that Barbara Gordon had is that if Batman believes he should talk to Jason Todd and understand him, then it turns into, why are you doing it now, right? Jason Todd's been back all this time. Why are you just now at a point where you believe he needs to be talked to? Now, here's the big issue that we have with the three Jokers, right? We don't know when this story takes place. And that's really the big question that a lot of you guys have. I'll tell you, a lot of you guys asking that in the previous video. When does this story take place? Because Red Hood has his own story arc going on right now that has nothing to do with this. When does this take place? Does it take, like, is this a story that basically takes place at the very beginning of DC Rebirth? And if you want to do a great big chronology, you would just put this at the very beginning of the chronology, right? So read it once you read DC Universe Rebirth #1, right? I mean, is that what this is? Like, we don't really know where it fits in. We don't know if it takes place before Doomsday Clock, after Doomsday Clock. We don't really know. We're not really given a definitive answer here because it was a story that looks like it was supposed to be written years ago. But the whole point behind this is that you basically end up picking up with Red Hood. Now, I love the way that Geoff Johns writes Red Hood. And Geoff Johns is one of the few writers that can write Jason Todd incredibly well, right? He's one of the few writers that can do that. He basically writes him in kind of the classic Red Hood fashion. And people who were fans of Jason Todd, right, whether they got on board before or, you know, whether like they're super old school, right, so they've been reading since like the 70s, or they got on board with like Under the Red Hood and they've been following him ever since. But I have to imagine you guys love the way Red Hood's depicted here, right? Because it's classic Jason Todd. This guy like literally grabs one of the Joker's henchmen and just snatches him up. And it's like, you guys were basically told to find a place to hide a whole lot of chemicals. So you better have a good response. Where did you hide them? Where did you put them? And this guy's just kind of like, I can't say, like, I'm not going to tell you because if I do, the Joker's going to do worse than me, right? Like he would do worse. Like he would do worse than anything you could do, right? He would kill me in the worst possible way. And the response of Jason is, you don't have to tell me. Detectives in the hood are already picking it up, right? It's basically pool cleaner. Now, this is where you kind of defect from classic Red Hood. If this was the Under the Red Hood story, if it was like that version of the Red Hood, he would have killed this guy like that. He would have been like, well, now I'm done with you. Pow! And then like that would have been the end of it, right? Instead, he's like, we're going to hand you over to the cops. And this is kind of cool because Geoff Johns plays on this idea that Jason Todd understands the severity of what it meant to kill that Joker. And he's trying not to fall down that slippery slope, right? Which is one of those important things when people kind of make the argument, well, if Batman Batman killed a guy, then Batman would become as bad as the criminals. Only if he allowed himself to be. You can stop. The slippery slope argument is like saying just because you sit down at a casino table one time means you're never going to get up again and you're going to turn into a degenerate gambler. That's not true. That's not true at all. Basically saying people are not in control of themselves, right? It's a really good way to absolve yourself of responsibility, right? And so with that being the case, it's one of these things where Batman's kind of like, okay, we'll try to find Jason Todd, but at the moment we can't find him, right? We tried tracking him, we can't locate him because he doesn't want to be found. And so he basically says we're going to go someplace else. And they end up going to Blackgate, right? Now the reason why they go to Blackgate is because of the fact that Batman says that there were fingerprints that were found on the body of Judge Walls. And when Barbara asks, who do these fingerprints belong to? Batman's response is Joe Chill. Right now, as soon as he gets into Blackgate prison, actually one of the inmates here is Rupert Thorne, which is awesome to see. Rupert Thorne is old school. He's super old school. He was part of the old Steve Englehart Batman run, and I think that's where he was introduced, although I'm not going to swear to it. But of course, you end up picking up with like the cell of Joe Chill. When Batman gets in there, he kind of chokes up for a second, right? He's like, you know who, you know who I am, right? He kind of gets caught up in the moment, right? Like it really shows that Batman is still afraid of Joe Chill. It's a very small and a very nuanced thing. It can be kind of easy to miss, but that's exactly what it is. Batman is still afraid of Joe Chill. And it's like, damn, right? Like he still really is just a little kid crying over the fact that his mommy and his daddy got shot. But as soon as he gets into the cell, Joe Chill's gone. And that's when Barbara shows up and says like, they moved him, right? Like he's basically sick. And you end up finding out that he's in the hospital wing and he's got weeks to live because he's dying of stage 4 cancer. And so the question becomes, if Joe Chill's dying of cancer, how did somebody get their hands on his fingerprints, and how did they get those fingerprints to the body of Judge Walls, right? Now, that can be done in any variety of ways, right? The Joker could just sneak in here, pretending to be like a doctor, hide his hair, right? Put like a mask over his face or something like that. Like what what's his name did in The Dark Knight, right? What Heath Ledger did, pretend to be a nurse. It was the ugliest damn nurse I ever saw in my life, but pretend to be a nurse, right? And then basically walk in there and steal the guy's fingerprints, right? Just put some tape on his fingerprints and then put it on a crime scene somewhere. It's not hard to do. Nonetheless, Batman kind of picks up on this, and where Barbara asked the question, like, what's the connection, right, between the Joker and Joe Chill and like everything else besides you? Like, what's the connection there? And so we end up finding out here is that Jason Todd had basically accessed the back computers from his helmet. Alfred picked up on the location and basically says, hey, like, go find him over there, right? So we end up basically picking up in the Gotham City Athletic Association, which is a condemned building. So obviously Joker would operate out of it. And once Red Hood gets up there, he actually pulls a crowbar out, which is cool. Once he gets into this place where this pool is, it's literally filled with bodies, right? Like it is littered with bodies. And he sticks a Q-tip down in there and it starts to hiss, right? So it looks like it's a pool filled with Joker toxin. They're using people as experiments to like use this toxin to achieve a goal. What that goal is, we don't know. Like presumably they're trying to recreate the chemical that made Joker into who he was at Ace Chemical. Presumably that formula has been lost, right, over some measure of time, or they're just making more of it. And so initially like this body kind of flies out and it's just sort of like, oh my God, you know, like this person's infected. Joker kicks him back into the water and that guy's basically dead now. But then he's taken from behind by one of the Jokers, right? He's snatched up, you know, and they're kind of like, we'd hoped you'd come. And you get this amazing like probably the single best moment in this whole story. Jason Todd basically wakes up tied to a chair, right? And you have the criminal who's there. He's like, you know, Jason Todd, petty thief, you should have been cuffed and arrested, but then Batman took you in to make you the second Robin. You were reborn, and then after your death, you were reborn again, right? That's the origin of Jason Todd summed up in 7 panels. But he says like things always happen in 3s. You had a life, you were killed, you came back to life, and now you're going to be reborn again, right? You've been reborn twice, time to be reborn a 3rd time. And it's one of these things where he responds and he's like, I killed one of those Jokers, I'm gonna kill you too. And this version of the Joker just starts laughing almost maniacally. And then he responds, right? It looks like it's a painful experience. He responds to Jason and he says, I'll let you in on a secret about the Joker. It hurts when I laugh. Here's the thing. All right, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. Here's the thing. I like the criminal. I like this version of the Joker the way that Jeff Johns write him. DC Comics, never use him again, right? Like never, ever bring him back or use him again, right? Like just let him stay like this. Keep him like this. Let this be the last time we ever see him, because if you do, some other writer is gonna get their hands on him and they're gonna screw it up. Do not do anything with the criminal Joker, right? So it's one of these things where Jason's kind of like, so you're telling me you're the real Joker? And that's when he chimes in and he says, who is the Joker really? And so it really seems to point at this idea that the Joker is not necessarily a person, the Joker's an ideology. And that's something that really DC's been pointing at for a number of years through various stories, right? Like Scott Snyder's New 52 run, Steve Englehart, you can even go all the way back, right? You can go all the way back during the era of like Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams, right? That like the Joker's a concept concept. He's an ideology. The Joker represents chaos, and anybody can be the Joker if there's somebody who believes that chaos needs to be supreme. But for all intents and purposes, we as readers identify with the Joker as being a particular person, right? Like as being an individual who's running around doing things. But that's what makes this interesting, is because what happens if you have three individuals out there who all believe that Batman is bad and like chaos should reign supreme? All they have to do is make themselves look like the Joker, and then they are, right? Like that's really all it takes. And so they ask Jason the question, they say, why put on that helmet and call yourself Red Hood after what we did to you, right? Because Red Hood was the persona of the Joker before he became the Joker, right? In almost every single iteration of his character, he's been Red Hood before he was the Joker. And of course, you know, having beat him to death, the response of Jason Todd is, it's a joke, right? It's a play on you. You killed me, so I'm going to become not necessarily you directly, but I'm going to become a mockery of what you stand for. And I'm going to, you know, my goal is to basically fight alongside Batman, right? To use this thing that you consider to be so important, this representation of chaos, and become that, but become the opposite of that, to stand in line with Batman against you. And so it's one of these things where they're like, is it really a joke? Because like we left you with brain damage and permanent nerve pain, physical and emotional trauma so severe that the only relief you ever find is when you inflict pain on others. You and me, boy, we're more alike than you'd care to admit, and that is true. That's 100% true. The Joker finds satisfaction with hurting people. That's the nature of the Joker. He finds enjoyment in that. Now, usually it's part of some greater scheme, but he finds satisfaction in inflicting harm on others, specifically if the harm that he can inflict can affect Batman and get Batman to chase after him again. The Joker finds enjoyment out of that. And so the criminal kind of looks at Jason and says, like, you know that already, right? You nearly died and you blame the Batman for it. You hate him for it. And he says, I do too. Now, this seems to point at the origin of the Joker, seemingly this idea that all the origins of the Joker are the same, in the sense that he encountered Batman under some strange circumstance, whether it's because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, what have you, but he was knocked into a vat of chemicals, and that led to him becoming who he was. But he almost died in that vat of chemicals. That's the Joker's stance, right? So that's why Red Hood and the Joker are so similar. It's one of these things where the Joker kind of says, you hate him most of all, right? Like you hate the Batman most of all because he's the reason why you are where you are. And he says Batman needs a better Joker. But simply put, you're not bright enough. You, the way you are not good enough. And so he says, tell me, Jason, does it hurt when you laugh? And then you basically end up having him cracked over the head with a crowbar again. Now, this is where things get kind of murky here, because the comedian starts cracking Jason Todd over the head and then starts saying, you know, this really is more fun than it was the first time, right? So it looks like this is the version of the Joker that killed Jason Todd. Geoff Johns seems like he could be going back and forth. Now, it could also be that I'm remembering it wrong, right? But it seems like he's kind of going back and forth in between issue number 1 and issue number 2, which really kind of begs the question, what if these are just 3 different versions of the same guy, right? Like 3 different personas or something like that. They're of seemingly the same individual, right? So like there's one Joker, there's the criminal element to the Joker, there's the clown element to the Joker, and the comedian element to the Joker, right? So the serious nature, the goofy nature, and the one who just does things for the fun of it. And then what if something happened and it just manifested into 3 different versions? We're not really given an answer here, right? We're just kind of guessing at this point in time. But we're seemingly Jason Todd's being cracked over the head. He basically says, you better make sure I stay dead this time, because if I don't, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna kill you. And the Joker's like, no, what are you talking about? I'm rooting for you. I'm hoping you rise back up and you prove us wrong. I'm hoping you become the Joker, right? Cue to Barbara Gordon busting the door in alongside Batman, right? And once they get in there, they're immediately surrounded by like all these Joker guys, right? These Joker looking guys, you know, and initially, like, you know, it's kind of like they're not really Jokers. They're just kind of people who were taken in, who were basically, you know, who were victims, more or less. But the problem is that as they're attacking Batman, one of them hits his utility belt. And when that happens, it basically ends up calling in the Batmobile, which just comes flying into that location and actually kills a bunch of these guys. And so Batman's like, you know, like, we can still save some of them, you know, we can still save Jason. And it's kind of like, save me? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not Jason. And that's one of these things where it looked like it was Jason Todd who was turned, but apparently it wasn't, right? He's like, I'm not, you know, right? Like, I'm not Jason, right? Like, you know, kind of Barbara Gordon freaking out, like, Jason, is that you? And it's like, no, that's not Jason. And so Jason Todd is not there, right? The pool's been drained. Jason Todd's not there. And then ultimately they, of course, end up locating it. Now, once they bring him in, Jason Todd has not really turned. He's not really the Joker, right? He just starts freaking out, going off on Batman. You know, Batman's like, are you all right? He's like, am I okay? Like, what do you think, right? Like, you did this to me. This is the second time I've been snatched up by the Joker and been beat to death. At least this time you made it in time, right? Like, you made it before I died, but you put me on this path. I'm in this life because of you. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here, right? Like, I wouldn't be in this moment, in this time, living this life that I'm living right now. Like, he just wholly blames Batman. It's resentment villain at his absolute worst. You know, I hate you for this. I hate you for the fact that you just buried me into the ground and then just replaced me with Robins willy-nilly without giving it a thought, right? Without even caring at all. And so Barbara Gordon steps up, and Barbara Gordon is like, okay, calm down. We just need to get you someplace safe. Now, of course, they end up taking him to Barbara's apartment, and then she starts screaming at Batman because Batman's like, I've got to go do stuff, like check out Gotham City, because I'm emotionally stunted. I'm super stoic, which is not a practical lifestyle to live, and I just don't really reveal my emotions to anybody because, you know, reason and logic, because that makes perfect sense. And so ultimately, Jason Todd, of course, wakes up, realizing he's in the apartment of Barbara Gordon. He takes her book, Chronic Pain Management, right? So we can kind of learn how to cope with this chronic nerve pain that he experiences. And then once Barbara Gordon arrives, they kind of start having this heart-to-heart conversation. And the response of Barbara is, there's something that you have to understand, Jason. We all really thought you were dead. Everyone thought you were dead. Nobody knew that you were alive. If anybody had known you were alive, we would have come and found you. We would have moved heaven and earth. We would have burned down whatever town we had to get to. Batman would have taken out whoever he had to get to in order to find you. If we had known that you were alive, we would have been there by your side, grabbing you and bringing you back to a place that's safe. But it's one of these things where he just hadn't quite really picked up on that, you know? And it's one of these things where she's like, you know, we care about you. We all wish we had been there for you. And he kind of responds in saying that no one has ever said that to him. And she says she's saying it now. And the two of them actually share a kiss. Now, whether or not this will turn into something, I don't really know. And I'm a little weird about seeing like Jason Todd and Barbara Gordon kissing. It's a little strange to me because they're not really brother and sister, but they're kind of like adopted kids to a degree, like adopted brothers and sisters. So like a surrogate brother or a surrogate sister. Sister and brother is involved in their relationship in some way. And that's bad to, like, that's weird to me to see them like kissing. It's like, ugh. It's kind of gross. But, you know, Barbara Gordon immediately kind of puts it away. Says it was only a moment. No, like that's not going to happen. You know, like friend zone, like this, it's not going to happen, right? It's just, that's just not going to take place. And so you basically end up getting this kind of thing where Batman basically goes back, right? And he's looking at like all this information that he has at his disposal, right? Missing clowns, missing criminals, different things like that. Basically the Joker files, you know, and kind of skimming through this stuff and looking at this as best he can. Then suddenly something has something to do with Alaska, right? Like he picks up on something that has something to do with this place, right? With this state that's out there somewhere. And so you basically end up switching over to Joe Chill, who's been taken by the comedian, right? Taken by the comedian version of the Joker. He's basically snatched up and a video camera is put on him. And he says, okay, like lights, camera, action, time to talk. And he says, it's finally time to confess, Mr. Chill. Why did you really kill Thomas and Martha Wayne? Because apparently the reason that we got was not the reason that it happened. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.